This is HOA mess. And yes, the records really vanished. You picked the wrong rule to violate. That is what Karen screamed at me while I stood on the clubhouse steps holding the board packet that had arrived at my door by mistake. Evelyn Lewis, Gate Access Administrator for the Rosewood Design Review Association, blocked the door with her body and waved a laminated policy sheet between us like it was a restraining order. The packet was thick, rubber-banded, and addressed to someone 3 streets over, but inside was a tab that looked like it belonged to a different homeowner entirely. I worked nights as a fire alarm technician, so when I got home that morning and saw the packet sitting on my porch, I figured I would drop it off before I crashed. Now Evelyn was tapping her metal key fob on the doorframe, demanding I hand it over without looking inside. I checked my watch. I had a notary appointment booked for that afternoon, and missing it would delay my sworn statements for weeks. I needed to get this handled fast, but Evelyn was not moving. "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule," she said, her voice rising with every word. That was the first time I heard her say it. It would not be the last. I am in Chicago, Illinois, in a community where the portal is full of screenshots and accusations. The Rosewood Design Review Association has a reputation for moving goalposts, and Evelyn runs the gate codes like she owns the neighborhood. I live here because I needed a place close to the alarm dispatch hub where I could sleep during the day without neighbors banging on walls. What I did not need was an HOA administrator screaming at me on a Tuesday morning while I was holding evidence of something that did not add up. The tab in the packet was labeled with a name I recognized from a cold case that never made sense. 3 years ago, money disappeared from the clubhouse fund. Violations got staged on certain properties, and the minutes from that quarter were never posted. People whispered about it on the portal, but no one could prove anything. The paperwork vanished, complaints got lost, and the board said it was a clerical error. Now I was holding a packet with a tab that looked like it belonged to that same homeowner, and Evelyn wanted it back before I could ask questions. She stepped closer, her purple windbreaker rustling, and pointed at the packet. "That is confidential board material. You are not allowed to possess it." I stayed calm, kept my voice low. "It was delivered to my address. I am returning it." She shook her head, her straight brown hair tucked behind her ears, and tapped the key fob harder on the doorframe. The meeting was closed. You were not allowed to witness anything. I glanced past her into the clubhouse. The room was empty except for a folding table with a stack of notices and a laptop. No meeting was happening. I looked back at Evelyn. "There is no meeting right now." She jabbed her finger toward the packet. "You opened it. That is a violation. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw her hands shake. She was not just angry. She was panicked. I let her get the last word because I wanted the last consequence. I handed the packet over, turned around, and walked back to my car. A rideshare driver was waiting at the curb, engine running, and he rolled his eyes as I passed. He had heard the whole thing. I checked my watch again. I had 6 hours before the notary appointment, and I needed to figure out what was in that tab before Evelyn made the packet disappear for good. I went home, pulled up the neighborhood portal, and started scrolling. The cold case from 3 years ago was still there in archived threads. A homeowner named Marcus complained that he got fined for a fence that did not exist. Then his car got towed while he was at work, and when he appealed, the paperwork showed a signature he swore was not his. The board said it was a clerical error and refunded the fine. but Marcus moved out 6 months later. Other residents posted similar stories in the comments. Violations that did not match the photos. Fines that appeared after deadlines passed. Tow orders that came from gate access staff, not the board. All of it pointed back to Evelyn. But no one had proof. The threads got locked, and the complaints disappeared from the official records. I took screenshots of everything and saved them to a folder. Then I checked the portal audit log. Every upload, every document, every notice posted by the HOA had a timestamp and a user ID. I clicked through the logs from 3 years ago and found gaps, whole weeks where nothing got posted, then sudden bursts of activity under Evelyn's account. I clicked on one of the bursts and saw a batch of violation notices uploaded on the same day, all with identical formatting. I zoomed in on the metadata. The creation dates were weeks earlier, but they were uploaded together at the last minute. Someone had been sitting on those notices, waiting to deploy them. I printed the audit log pages and added them to a binder. Then I checked my email. The management company had sent me a notice that morning. It said I was required to submit a new form for my vehicle registration, even though I had already submitted one 2 months ago. The notice was dated yesterday, but the email timestamp showed it was sent at 6 in the morning, right after I picked up the board packet. The deadline was today at 5. I called the management company and got voicemail. I called again and got the front desk. I asked about the form, and the clerk said she did not see any record of my previous submission. I told her I had the confirmation email, and she put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was flat. The system shows your file was flagged for non-compliance. You need to resubmit. I asked who flagged it. She paused. That would be gate access. I hung up and checked my portal account. My previous upload was gone. The confirmation page was still in my email, but the portal showed no record of the file. I tried to upload the form again, and the page froze. I refreshed, tried again, and got an error message. My portal uploads were mysteriously failing right when the deadline hit. I grabbed my phone, took a photo of the completed form, and sent it directly to the management company email with a read receipt request. Then, I got in my car and drove to the management office. I had 4 hours before the notary appointment, and I was not going to let Evelyn delete my paperwork twice. The management office was in a strip mall 20 minutes away. I walked in and found the same clerk at the front desk. She looked up, saw me, and her face tightened. I handed her a printed copy of the form and the confirmation email from 2 months ago. She glanced at the email, then at her screen and clicked through a few pages. She leaned back in her chair. Your file shows you were out of compliance as of last week. I pointed at the email. That is my confirmation from May. She nodded slowly. I see that. But it is not in the system now. I asked if the system kept a log of deletions. She hesitated, then shook her head. I would need to check with the property manager. I asked when the property manager would be available. She checked her calendar. He is out until Monday. I felt my jaw tighten. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I had just sent to the office email. I submitted this an hour ago. She looked at the screen, then back at her computer. I do not see it yet. Email can take time. I asked if she could manually mark my account as compliant while we waited. She shook her head. Only gate access can update compliance flags. I asked if Evelyn was in the office. The clerk's expression shifted. She is not here right now. I thanked her and left. I checked my watch. 3 hours until the notary appointment. I needed to get ahead of this before Evelyn had time to move the goalposts again. I drove to the courthouse and requested public records for any complaints filed against the Rosewood Design Review Association in the last 5 years. The clerk handed me a request form and told me it would take 2 weeks. I filled out the form, paid the fee, and asked if there was any way to expedite it. She pointed at a checkbox for expedited processing with an additional fee. I checked the box, paid again, and left. On my way out, I passed a bulletin board with notices for small claims filings. One of them was from Marcus, the homeowner from the cold case. He had filed against the HOA 3 years ago for wrongful towing and lost paperwork. The case was dismissed, but the filing was still on record. I took a photo of the case number and added it to my evidence folder. I got home with 2 hours to spare and opened the binder I had started. I had the audit log printouts, the confirmation email, the photo of Marcus's filing, and the screenshots from the portal threads. I needed one more piece to connect Evelyn directly to the cold case. I pulled up the board packet photo I had taken before Evelyn grabbed it back. The image was blurry, but I could make out the tab label. It said Marcus Jennings, followed by a date from 3 years ago. I zoomed in on the pages visible underneath the tab. One page had a signature line at the bottom, and the signature did not match Marcus's name. It was too smooth, too loopy, like someone had traced it from another document. I enhanced the image as much as I could and printed it. Then I checked the time. 1 hour until the notary appointment. I grabbed the binder and drove to the notary office. The notary was a retired paralegal who worked out of a small office near the train station. I walked in, and she greeted me with a nod. I handed her the documents I needed notarized, and she started reviewing them. I asked if she had ever notarized HOA documents. She looked up. All the time. Why? I showed her the enhanced photo of the signature. I explained the cold case, the missing paperwork, and the compliance flag that appeared out of nowhere. She studied the photo, then handed it back. If that signature is forged, you need to file a fraud complaint. I asked how. She wrote down the name of an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and handed me the card. He is good. He will know what to do. I thanked her, got my documents notarized, and left. I had the attorney's card, the binder full of evidence, and a compliance deadline that was ticking down. I needed to get back to the management office before 5 and force someone to acknowledge my submission on the record. I checked my watch. 30 minutes. I got in my car and drove. I made it to the management office with 10 minutes to spare. The same clerk was at the desk, and this time she looked nervous when I walked in. I handed her another printed copy of the form, along with the notarized statement confirming I had submitted it twice. She took the papers, scanned them, and nodded. I will add this to your file. I asked her to email me confirmation immediately. She hesitated, then typed something on her computer and hit send. My phone buzzed. I opened the email and saw the confirmation. I thanked her and turned to leave, but she stopped me. You should know, Evelyn called earlier. She said you were harassing her. I turned back. I returned a misdelivered packet this morning. That is not harassment. The clerk shrugged. I am just letting you know. She filed a complaint. I asked what the complaint said. The clerk glanced at her screen. It says you opened confidential board materials without authorization. I pointed at the notarized statement. That packet was delivered to my address. I returned it unopened. The clerk frowned. That is not what the complaint says. I pulled out my phone and showed her the timestamp on the photo I had taken of the packet before I handed it back. The rubber band is still on. The envelope is still sealed. She looked at the photo, then at her screen, and sighed. I will forward this to the property manager. I asked if the complaint would go on my record. She nodded. It is already filed. I felt the anger building, but I kept my voice steady. I need a copy of the complaint. She printed it and handed it over. I scanned the page. The complaint was written in Evelyn's voice, full of procedural language and references to bylaws I had never seen. At the bottom, it said the board would review the matter at the next meeting and determine appropriate fines. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. I folded the complaint and added it to my binder. Then I asked the clerk if there was a way to respond in writing before the meeting. She nodded. You can submit a rebuttal to the board. I asked for the submission deadline. She checked her screen. 5 business days before the meeting. I did the math. That gave me 9 days. I thanked her and left. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I contacted Marcus through the portal and asked if he still had any paperwork from the cold case. He responded within an hour. He said he had kept everything, including the tow dispatch logs and the appeal forms with the forged signature. He offered to send me copies, and I gave him my email. The files arrived that night. I opened them and compared the signature on Marcus's appeal form to the signature in the board packet photo. They were identical. Same loops, same slant, same pressure. Someone had traced Marcus's signature onto multiple documents, and that someone had access to the board packets. I added the comparison to my binder. Then I called the attorney the notary had recommended. He answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation. He listened, asked a few questions, and then told me I had enough for a fraud complaint and a records request under state law. He said he could file both for me, but it would take time. I asked how much time. He said 6 to 8 weeks. I told him about the board meeting in 9 days and the rebuttal deadline. He paused. If you want to move faster, you need to bring this to the board yourself. Make them respond on the record. I asked if that would work. He said it depended on how much pressure I could apply. I thanked him and hung up. I had 8 days to write a rebuttal, organize the evidence, and figure out how to present it without getting railroaded. I opened the binder and started drafting. The rebuttal took me 3 days. I laid out the timeline, the audit log gaps, the forged signatures, the missing paperwork, and the compliance flag that appeared after I returned the board packet. I included screenshots, printouts, and Marcus's testimony. I kept the tone neutral and factual, but I made sure every sentence pointed back to Evelyn. I submitted the rebuttal to the management office on the deadline day, and the clerk confirmed receipt. Then I waited. The board meeting was in 6 days, and I had no idea if they would even read the rebuttal before voting. I checked the portal every day for updates, but nothing changed. The meeting agenda was posted 3 days before the meeting, and my name was listed under new business. No details, no context, just my name and a line that said compliance review. I printed the agenda and added it to the binder. Then I called Marcus and asked if he would be willing to attend the meeting as a witness. He hesitated. I moved out for a reason. I do not want to get dragged back into this. I told him I understood, but his testimony could make the difference. He sighed. If I show up, Evelyn is going to come after me again. I promised I would handle it. He agreed to come, but he said he was only staying for my part of the agenda. I thanked him and hung up. 2 days before the meeting, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had reviewed my rebuttal and determined that the complaint would remain on file pending further investigation. No hearing, no vote, no explanation. The meeting agenda was updated to remove my name from new business. I called the management office and got voicemail. I called again and got the clerk. I asked why my name was removed from the agenda. She said the board had decided to handle the matter administratively. I asked what that meant. She said she did not have any additional information. I hung up and checked the bylaws. Administrative review meant the board could impose fines without a hearing. I had been cut out of the process entirely. I called the attorney again. He told me I could request a formal hearing under the bylaws, but it would take weeks to schedule. I told him I did not have weeks. He said the only other option was to show up at the meeting anyway and force them to address it on the record. I asked if that was legal. He said it was risky, but it was not illegal. I decided to take the risk. The meeting was the next night, and I had the binder, the evidence, and Marcus on standby. I checked my watch. I had 16 hours to prepare. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the evidence and rehearsing the presentation. I printed extra copies of the key documents and organized them into a second binder. I labeled the binders clearly, one for me and one for the board. Then I checked the portal one more time. A new notice had been posted an hour earlier. It said the meeting location had been changed to the management office due to facility issues at the clubhouse. The new location was the same strip mall where I had submitted the form 2 weeks ago. I added the notice to the binder and set my alarm for the next morning. I needed to get there early and stake out a seat before Evelyn could block me again. The next evening, I arrived at the management office 30 minutes before the meeting. The lobby was empty except for the clerk, who looked surprised to see me. I told her I was there for the board meeting. She pointed to a conference room in the back. I walked in and found a folding table with 6 chairs and a projector screen. No one else was there yet. I sat down at the end of the table, placed my binders in front of me, and waited. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later. He looked nervous, but he sat down next to me and nodded. 5 minutes before the meeting, the board members started filing in. Evelyn was the last to arrive. She walked in, saw me, and froze. Then she turned to the board president and said something I could not hear. The president glanced at me, then back at Evelyn, and shook his head. The meeting started on time. The president called the meeting to order, and the secretary read the minutes from the last meeting. Then the president moved to new business. He looked at the agenda and frowned. I thought we removed the compliance review. Evelyn leaned forward, her key fob jingling as she tapped it on the table. We did. He is not supposed to be here. I stood up. I submitted a rebuttal and requested a hearing under the bylaws. The president looked at the secretary, who shuffled through a stack of papers. The secretary shook her head. I do not have a hearing request on file. I pulled out my copy of the rebuttal and the receipt from the management office. I submitted it on the deadline. The clerk confirmed receipt. The president looked at the clerk, who was standing in the doorway. She nodded. That is correct. Evelyn's face flushed. The board voted to handle this administratively. There is no hearing. I opened my binder and placed it on the table. Then I opened the second binder and slid it toward the president. I brought evidence of fraud, forgery, and selective enforcement. You can handle it administratively, or you can handle it on the record. Your choice. The room went silent. The president looked at the binder, then at Evelyn, then back at me. He sighed. Let us hear what you have to say. I started with the audit log. I showed the gaps from 3 years ago and the batch uploads under Evelyn's account. I pointed out the identical formatting on the violation notices and the metadata creation dates that did not match the upload dates. Then I moved to Marcus's case. I showed the forged signature, the tow dispatch logs, and the appeal forms that disappeared from the official records. Marcus stood up and confirmed his testimony. He said he never signed the appeal form and never authorized the tow. The board members leaned in to look at the documents. The president asked Evelyn if she had any response. She shook her head, her hands gripping the edge of the table. That is not how it happened. I moved to the compliance flag. I showed the confirmation email from 2 months ago, the portal audit log showing my upload, and the email from the management company requiring me to resubmit. I explained how my portal uploads failed right when the deadline hit, and how the compliance flag appeared immediately after I returned the board packet. Then I pulled out the board packet photo. I showed the tab with Marcus's name and the signature that matched the forged appeal form. I asked Evelyn how she had access to board packets 3 years after the case was closed. She did not answer. The president looked at the documents, then at Evelyn. "Do you have any explanation for this?" Evelyn stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule. That is how this works. I let her get the last word, because I wanted the last consequence." I reached into my binder and pulled out a public records response I had received that morning. It was from the city clerk's office, and it contained prior complaints against Evelyn for the same behavior. 3 separate homeowners had filed complaints about selective enforcement, missing paperwork, and intimidation tactics. All 3 complaints were dismissed because the homeowners did not have enough evidence. I handed copies to Marcus first, then slid a set across the table to the president. Evelyn tried to grab the papers, but the president held up his hand. "Sit down." She sat. The president read through the complaints, his expression hardening. He looked at the secretary. "Did you know about these?" The secretary shook her head. The president turned to Evelyn. "Why were these not disclosed to the board?" Evelyn did not answer. The president closed the binder and looked at me. "We will need to review this further. I am calling a special meeting for next week." I nodded and sat down. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "That was good. But she is not done." He was right. The next morning, I got a call from a tow company. The dispatcher said my car had been flagged for towing due to non-compliance. I asked what the violation was. She said the vehicle registration was expired. I told her my registration was current and I had submitted the form twice. She said she was just following the order. I asked who placed the order. She hesitated. "Gate access." I told her to hold off and hung up. Then I called the management office and got the clerk. I told her about the tow order, and she said she would look into it. I asked if Evelyn had access to tow dispatch. She paused. Yes, she handles gate enforcement. I hung up and drove to the tow yard. The truck was already on my street when I arrived. I pulled up next to the driver and rolled down my window. He looked at me, then at his clipboard. "You the owner?" I nodded. He shook his head. "I got an order to tow this vehicle. Non-compliance." I handed him a copy of my registration and the confirmation email from the management office. He looked at the papers, then at his clipboard. "This is not matching what I have." I asked to see the order. He handed me the clipboard. The order was dated that morning, and it listed my vehicle as non-compliant with an expired registration. At the bottom, it was signed by Evelyn. I took a photo of the order and handed the clipboard back. That is a false order. My registration is current. The driver shrugged. I just do what the order says. I asked if he could cancel the tow. He shook his head. You need to take it up with the person who placed the order. I told him I would, and I drove to the management office. The clerk saw me coming and stood up. I handed her the photo of the tow order. She looked at it, then at her screen, and her face went pale. This should not have been issued. Your account is compliant. I asked if Evelyn had placed the order. She nodded. I need to call her. I told her not to bother. I would handle it myself. I walked out and drove to the gate access office. It was a small building near the main entrance to the neighborhood, and Evelyn's car was parked out front. I walked in and found her at a desk with a stack of paperwork. She looked up, and her expression shifted from surprise to anger. You are not allowed in here. I placed the photo of the tow order on her desk. You placed a false tow order on my vehicle. She glanced at the photo and shrugged. Your registration is expired. I showed her the confirmation email on my phone. My registration is current. You know that. She tapped her key fob on the desk. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry. I let her finish. Then I pulled out my phone and held it up. I am recording this. You just admitted to placing a false tow order and threatening daily fines without cause. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I kept the phone up. I am taking this to the board, the management company, and the city. You are done. She grabbed for the phone, but I stepped back. She lunged again, and I turned toward the door. A security guard was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. He had been watching the whole thing. He looked at Evelyn, then at me. She does this a lot. I nodded. I know. The guard stepped aside, and I walked out. I checked my watch. I had 3 days until the special meeting, and I now had a recording of Evelyn admitting to the false tow order. I added it to the binder and drove home. The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the clubhouse. I arrived early again, and this time the room was full. Word had spread on the portal, and other homeowners had shown up to watch. Marcus was there, along with 2 of the homeowners from the public records complaints. I sat at the front table with my binders, and the board members filed in. Evelyn was the last to arrive, and she looked rattled. The president called the meeting to order and announced that the board had completed its review of the compliance matter. He said the board had found sufficient evidence of procedural irregularities and selective enforcement. He paused, then looked at Evelyn. The board has decided to terminate the vendor relationship with gate access effective immediately. The room erupted. Homeowners started clapping, and Evelyn stood up. You cannot do that. I have a contract. The president held up a hand. The contract includes a termination clause for cause. We are invoking it. Evelyn turned to the other board members. You are all going to regret this. The president ignored her and continued. We are also referring the matter to the management company for further investigation. If fraud is confirmed, we will involve law enforcement. Evelyn grabbed her key fob and stormed out. The president waited until the door closed, then looked at me. We owe you an apology. I nodded. I appreciate that. But I am not done. I opened my binder and pulled out the recording from the gate access office. I played it for the room. Evelyn's voice filled the space, loud and clear. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry." The room went silent. The president leaned back in his chair. "That is a direct admission of abuse." I nodded. "And I have documentation of 2 other homeowners who were targeted the same way. I am filing a formal complaint with the state." The president looked at the other board members, then back at me. "We support that." One of the homeowners from the public records complaint stood up. "I want to file too." Then another. "Me too." By the end of the meeting, 5 homeowners had committed to filing complaints. The president said the board would cooperate fully with any investigation. I thanked him and left. The fallout happened fast. Within a week, the management company launched an internal audit and found that Evelyn had been doctoring compliance records for years. The audit revealed a pattern of selective enforcement targeting homeowners who had filed complaints or challenged board decisions. The company terminated her contract and issued refunds to over 20 homeowners. The city opened an investigation into the forged signatures and the false tow orders. Evelyn hired an attorney, but the evidence was overwhelming. She eventually settled and agreed to pay restitution. The board held a recall vote, and 3 members resigned. New leadership took over, and the first thing they did was commission an independent review of the HOA's financial records. The review uncovered the missing money from the cold case. It turned out Evelyn had been diverting clubhouse funds into a vendor account she controlled. The total was over $15,000. She was charged with embezzlement, and the case went to trial. I testified, along with Marcus and the other homeowners. The jury convicted her, and she was sentenced to probation and ordered to pay full restitution. The neighborhood portal exploded with posts celebrating the verdict. Someone started a thread thanking me for reopening the case. I did not respond, but I read every comment. A few days after the trial, I got a letter from the new board president. It was a formal apology and an invitation to join the compliance committee. I declined, but I appreciated the gesture. I had done what I set out to do, and I was ready to move on. The notary appointment I had been rushing to that morning turned out to be the start of everything. The sworn statements I filed became the foundation of the state complaint, and the attorney I hired used them to build the case. None of it would have happened if Evelyn had not panicked when I returned that board packet. She knew what was inside, and she knew I could connect the dots. Her phone died mid-rant during the trial, and she froze in place like her whole defense had collapsed. The jury noticed. The insurance company sent the HOA a risk warning that made the board panic and scramble to cut ties with Evelyn before the liability landed on them. The HOA canceled the vendor relationship tied to the abuse, and Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes for everyone to see. An insurance risk warning that made the board panic was the final push that forced them to act. The cold case was closed, the fraud ring was exposed, and the neighborhood finally had accountability. I still work nights, and I still check the portal every now and then. The screenshots and accusations are gone now, replaced by updates about landscaping and pool schedules. It is quiet, which is how it should have been from the start. Thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.